Well, as I mentioned, we just had that breaking news out where the German Chancellor Angela Merkel said that essentially they could not agree, the G20 leaders could not agree to more funding resources for the IMF. Let's get more reaction on this. Our next guest is a former Deputy Treasury Secretary under Bill Clinton. He has just returned from a trip to Europe where he met with officials at the European Commission. And he also, by the way, knows Greek Prime Minister George Papandreou. So, Stu, very timely. Stu Eizenstat with us. Very timely to be talking with you about this. Let me first, though, get your reaction to these headlines from Merkel. Is it no surprise, essentially, that they couldn't come together with resources for the IMF?
You know, Betty Lou, it really underscores two basic themes to this G20 meeting in Cannes. The first is the lack of consensus on the part of the G20 countries, a great disarray about what to do, in contrast to 2009, when there was a basic agreement on the need for everyone to stimulate to get out of the Great Recession. And second, the dramatic shift in influence from the West, the U.S. and the European Union, which is struggling with weak economies and dysfunctional government decision-making, to the developing countries, China, India, Brazil, which are buoyant and confident. And this IMF decision is a sign of that disarray, the lack of consensus on what is clearly an important contribution, because an enhanced IMF could help backstop the new European Financial Stability Facility.
Right, and I think that they're still trying to work some way in coordinating between the IMF and that stability fund. But Stu, you know, here in the U.S., when you talk about, you know, essentially what is our diminished role in the global economy in the G20, we have only ourselves to blame for that, in the sense that we just don't have the resources to contribute anymore, right?
That's right. When you're running budget surpluses, as we did in the Clinton administration, when you have strong growth, your influence is commensurate. When, on the other hand, you have very sluggish growth, high unemployment, and a government which continues, because of the impasse in Congress, to show itself to be unable to meet its obligations to a short-term growth package and a long-term deficit reduction package, it translates, when you go to Cannes, into a lack of influence.
Right.
And this is palpable. This is the very time when the U.S. is essential. When we had the Asian financial crisis, Betty Lou, in 1997, the U.S. took the lead. It worked with the IMF.
Yep.
That day seems to have passed until we get our house in order.
I remember that very vividly. I was there in Asia when all of that blew up, Stu. Let me ask you about George Papandreou. You know him, and you are appalled by what he's done.
I think that the decision to go to a referendum after weeks of negotiation with his EU partners, getting Angela Merkel to get his bondholders to take a 50% cut, and then in return getting billions of dollars from the EU and not telling them that he intended to go to a referendum, was extraordinarily irresponsible and not something I would have expected of him. Unfortunately, I think he's reached the end of his rope. The good sign is that the opposition party, the New Democrats, will support the package, but I think that this may be the end of his own prime ministership.
So you think he should step down, Stu?
Well, that's for someone else to decide, but I think that his days are probably numbered. What now is critical is to put this Greek issue behind them, to implement the agreement they made a few weeks ago to recapitalize the European banks to the tune of over 100 billion euros,
right,
to make sure that they enhance the European Stability Facility by getting the IMF, China, and others to contribute to it. And importantly, the very major decision made just 3 days after taking office by the new head of the European Central Bank to cut interest rates. That is a pro-growth policy, and it's a very good start for Draghi.
Right. All right, Stu, thank you. Great to see you again. Stu Eizenstat.